Hi, everybody. Welcome to another session from the Collective series From Darkness to Radiance. I am RivkaLeah, and I just want to remind everybody in these talks, I am not a doctor or a therapist or a counselor. I am just talking about my own experiences and experiences from my trusted friends that they've given me permission to talk about, and people that I interview. So today I am lucky enough to have a good friend, Marisa, with me. Marisa is a fellow INFJ divergent, and I was so blessed to meet her at a conference. And when I started these podcasts, she was one of the first people that I thought of to talk to. So I would love everybody to welcome Marisa. And I wanted to start with, I'm just going to jump right in here. So this is like new to me, but I just love jumping in here. So welcome.
Thank you.
And can you briefly share your personal experience with trauma and how it has been affecting your life?
Sure. So my story was from 2018, and I went through a unique situation. That's the way I always tell people that my experience was not your typical. And I always tell everybody, though, that I don't believe in trauma shaming. I don't believe in comparing, because I've even thought about it this way. What I've gone through, somebody else could have walked through it and really not have been affected by it at all. It just happened to be this circumstance, this time of my life, being a single mom, going into it, all of those things together. The history is that I was divorced and a single mom, had my own business, my own home, things like that. And I had met somebody through church, and I always tell everybody that our wedding, a year after dating, courting, and truly the sense of courting and doing it the way that I was raised to within the religion, it was very by the book. And our wedding was different because there was 300 people at the wedding, and every person knew each other.
Wow.
Everybody that was there for my family and for my side knew his family and his side. In fact, it was a shock up to that point that people even would come up and say, how is it that you two hadn't known each other in the past? And it was quite interesting, to the point that his father and my father had a professional and a personal friendship for 40 years before that. So it was, in fact, the first family event that I attended for his family, and I walked in, my parents went with, and everybody came up to my dad and said hello to him before they said hello to me, because that's how interconnected our families were. And we said it was kind of like a Kardashian wedding for our church, that everyone, I mean, it was a party. It was beautiful. And the history of it, though, was that the person that I married was not the person that even left the reception. That's how quick the change happened. So yeah, that's a brief version of the setup.
Okay. All right. Well, that's, I have found that it happens that quickly.
Mm-hmm.
They, unfortunately, people can mask themselves for so long. And then when they get their goal, the mask quickly comes off.
Yes.
So I'm glad that it was eye-opening at first. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced during your journey through the trauma into healing, and what type of coping mechanisms were you using?
Well, now, several years later, I can tell you now I've accepted that most of my coping mechanisms were very healthy. There's one that stands out that I wish I would have handled better, and I'll explain the difference. The acceptance part at first was hard, because it was like life had slapped me so hard in the face. So, I mean, it was like overnight. And all I wanted to do was protect my kids. So I no longer mattered. All I wanted to do was get my children out of this situation safely. And it was like my entire world was now from somebody else's viewpoint, and they were trying to tell me what to believe, and nothing was adding up. The stories that I was being told about people around him didn't add up. He was disappearing. I mean, instantly the right after the wedding, and none of it made sense. 2 plus 2 no longer equaled 4 because of him. And I knew this wasn't right. And I had made the decision, and I remember the day, and I remember the decision making that he had to make it his prerogative to leave, because he was trying to sink his claws into me deeper and deeper. Immediately started trying to alienate me from my family. Went on a smear campaign against every person that I knew. He was trying to actually, so my home, I lived in it, and rented it, but my parents owned it. And he immediately was trying to steal my home from my parents. When that didn't work, he tried to get my parents to give him a car, just everything. Then he was trying to get me to take my kids and take off in the middle of the night. I mean, just everything. He was trying to control every piece of my life overnight. And again, this just didn't feel right, because that's not what I was used to. It was not my environment that I was brought up to be a part of, or kind of family that I felt safe in. So that was instantly. But my coping after that was, one thing was, as I remember laying on the couch, and this was like 3 or 4 days after he left, and my wedding dress was still hanging in my guest bedroom. And he had just taken off the night before, and something had told me to check the bank account, and it went from lots of money down to 0. And that was my sign. I knew he wasn't going to give it back, but I realized him taking that money was my safety. If he took the money and took off, he would have a reason why he couldn't come back. And so I decided this was a good thing. Let it be. Just let it be. It doesn't matter what happens tomorrow. Just let that be. I don't know why. Just something was just like, let it be. But what I learned at that moment was, if I gave up, they won. And it wasn't pointed at any particular person, but it was pointed to all of the people that actually knew what he really was and chose not to tell me. There were people at my wedding that knew the truth and chose to stay silent. That's unforgivable. Unforgivable.
It is unfortunate in situations. I've heard in a lot of different types of trauma situations, people do know.
Yeah.
And they don't let the next quote unquote target.
Yes.
I hate using the word victim, because we're no longer victims. We're all survivors now. But it's fascinating to me. Their family and friends know.
Yep. Because they're in denial too. Because if they accept it, then they have to do something about it.
Exactly. And it's easier for them to see it happen to someone else.
Yeah. And I will never be upset. There was 2 people that came forward afterwards and said, I wish I would have spoke up. I thought he had changed. Now, I do believe them. I do believe they thought he had made a change, because they saw me and they thought, oh, he must have really gotten help. He's doing great. Look at his life now. I don't blame those 2, only those 2. The rest, I do. I hold them accountable. I don't blame them, but I hold them accountable for their choice and their actions. But it's interesting to me, and what my coping was I'm not going to blame myself. My daughter actually was the one that said something that changed everything. My daughter looked at me and said, Mom, do you really think he just conned you? He conned everyone. He conned all of us, our family. All of us were conned together, not just you. And I thanked her for that in that moment, because I never thought about it that way. I was blaming myself, saying, what did I miss? Did I miss some signs? I'm a single mom. Do I have a history of this? And it's like, no, you're right. It wasn't me. It was everyone was conned by this person. And as it turns out, he has a history of it. I can't even remember now, because it's been so many years ago, but I do know of at least 4 or 5 women previous to me. And what was interesting was hearing my story out of one of the other women. I've met her, and she told me my story word for word. But the coping that I wish I would have done better is the one of overworking. And I tease and say, hi, I'm Marisa. I'm a former workaholic, but that's still a lie. And I know
Current workaholic.
yeah, you would call me out on that one in about 2 hot seconds. So I might as well tell it myself. But I don't mean to, but I've realized at that moment in 2018, the one thing I could control was taking care of my children. And I didn't have anything left. I literally overnight lost even my childhood best friend that 6 weeks prior had stood up in my wedding. She sent me a text and said, whatever this that you're going through, I'm not going to be a part of it, just like that. And instead of defending myself, I said, you know what? Okay. I decided to step back, and the way I got through it was the people that want to show up that are authentically going to be there will show up.
Right.
Anybody that else doesn't, that's on them. And I never blamed them. I didn't try to control anybody else's narrative. I didn't try to defend it, because I thought the people that love me and know me, if you knew me for 38 years and this man came around and in 5 hot seconds smears me enough for you to believe him, I don't want you.
Right. You didn't know me at all then.
Yeah, and it's fine. That's okay. But my coping was overworking. And I know this, and I recognize it. I remodeled a lot of my house. I doubled my company that I owned at the time. In the 2 years after that, I doubled it. I mean, significantly, where my income went up 20, 30,000 a year for 2-3 years straight. I since retired because, and this is where I can tell you the coping was not healthy. I went into adrenal fatigue. My health was suffering. And it was so out of balance where I would be up at 4 o'clock in the morning. Friday nights, I wouldn't get home till 10, 11 o'clock at night, sleep, get up at 4 a.m. on Saturdays, go right back to work. So by Saturday evenings to Monday evenings, I could not get off the couch. I'd be so utterly exhausted from the amount of hours I stood up and worked and had to talk to people and, all of that. But I realize now that I did not fully allow my body to heal because in ways, and again, it's not an excuse, but I couldn't take that time. I was a single mom.
Right. I hear that a lot, that the trauma affects your health.
Yeah.
And, like you said, you were coping by overworking because you really needed to protect your children.
I had no choice.
So how were you able to get out of this? It sounds like he exited the situation pretty quickly after emptying the bank account.
Yeah.
So what were your next steps? How did you get out of it to get yourself and your kids to a safe place, a healing place?
I took actually the first couple of weeks, again, with my old business, I rented space. I spoke up to everybody I worked with right away and told them what was going on. And they were I remember one of my good friends, she was incredibly angry because she said, he didn't just steal from you, he stole from all of us. Every one of us that gave you a gift at that wedding was fleeced as well. And I said, yes, and I'm sorry. And she goes, no, she told me this. She's like, I'm not going to let you apologize. And I said, but I feel obligated. She goes, no, you're not going to apologize. You didn't do this.
Right.
And I remember being so incredibly grateful to her at the moment. I still have evidence. And in fact, recently I found a lot of my files and I couldn't even open them. But I had so many pages of threats that I had to go and get a restraining order. Just in case, because he tried to break into my home after, I had to go and I went to a women's shelter and got myself and my children registered just in case. I was trying to be as proactive as possible and I was trying to be as logical as possible. I'm like, okay, you're in this, but you can get yourself out, but you have to do this without emotion. And I had to shift my mindset that this was not a situation that I caused. I just happened to be in the situation and now I need to get out. And so I stayed focused on that the entire time. But that day when I was laying on the couch, I made a decision, and it's been my motto ever since that, and it's actually going to be the title of a very, very soon book to plug it's going to come out. It's been in the works for several years about that. I use happiness as revenge.
Yes.
And
I
I love that term. And it literally came to me out of the blue when I was laying on the couch 3 days after he left. I'm like, I get to use happiness as my revenge in life now.
Yeah.
And it was a very long process. Like, you want something like that to be done immediately. It's never overnight. And that's the hardest part of it, is like, I'm the type of person, once I've made a decision that somebody's not working in my life, that I'm pretty quick about it, that I'm very upfront, but I've made this decision, this is not working for me. And I can be incredibly monotone about it, not in a bad way, but just like, let's be very adult about this. Not that I ever want to, but like, when you have to face those hard conversations, I want to do this without any emotion, and just try to be as loving and as careful as possible.
Without the drama.
Exactly. And when you come into these traumatic situations, it isn't overnight. It takes months and years to untangle yourself, your children, but the emotional effects last even longer. I can tell you, to this day, I still have triggers. But what I did in that first time period was, I got the restraining order. I set myself up just in case I needed a place to hide because of his threats. I did also go to therapy, and the therapist, I actually was offended, not the reason why you would think. She kept telling me, "You're doing great. I wish other women were handling things the way you are. You'll be fine." I'm like, "No, I need more. Please give me more." And she's like, No. You don't understand. You're doing great. You just got to get through this. I'm like, No. Give me something. She's like, "I can't. Just get out of it." And at the time, I was like half laughing and half like, well, what do I do with this?
Because a lot of people don't seek the professional help, and
Yeah.
you were taking all of the professional steps. So she was trying to tell you you're on the right
Yes.
path.
But at the time,
But
I needed more.
yes, living
In my
through it,
Yeah.
there's just a hole that you still needed to have filled.
And in fact, my GP offered to put me on antidepressants, and I laughed and I said, "Will they fix the problem?" And he started laughing so hard he sat down. He goes, "No, it won't fix it." I said, "Well, then what's the point?" He goes, "I wish more people realize that." And I realized, I'm just in this situation. Even though it really sucks, I'm going to get out of it. One way or another, there will be an end to this. And so I moved, I went into hiding. I became a professional gray rock. I call it professional status because my business was very visible, and I have children. And so I decided to become as boring as possible, because I always view that when you're dealing with somebody that, like I always say, a con artist or whatever dark personality on top of it, again, I can't diagnose either. I can just tell you what I've been through. But I realized in that moment that I was the mouse and he was the cat.
Right.
And I needed him to grow bored and no longer obsess about the situation and what he was losing.
Right.
And then move forward. Because then once he no longer cared, I would be free emotionally, as in he wouldn't try to pop up out of the blue or try to worm his way back in, because I was not going to have that because of the protection of my children. So that 6 weeks really taught me a lot in my life, but it also taught me how much I'm capable of. That was what I got out of it, that I am a heck of a lot more capable than I realized before that.
Yeah, it's interesting how many survivors that I have spoken to, when you're going through it, you don't see it.
Mm-mm.
And after you've come out the other side of it, and you're on your healing journey, you see exactly how much you're capable of withstanding, and you have a little bit more compassion for yourself.
Absolutely.
And I love hearing that you had people around you that were telling you this was not you. You don't have to apologize for anything that he did. You know, society says as women, we need to be responsible for what men think and feel. We need to guard ourselves and shrink ourselves down so that they're not upset. And that's not our job. Everybody is responsible for their own upset or happy. So, I'm thrilled hearing how you were able to get through that. So what advice or insights could you, and I don't know, did I ask you this already? What could you give other individuals who are going through their healing process?
Well, I wrote actually a couple things down because they were very important to me. But the first one for me that I wrote down was that accepting that this isn't because of me, this just happened to me. That is the one I always give everybody else to, because if I've had a lot of people come to me when they've come through traumatic situations that are similar, and I always try to remind them, this isn't you, this is the situation. And one day the story will not define you. It might be defining you now, but it's been interesting because I've made a lot of new friends since this time period. Because again, it was a great purge. I will tell you that much. Is it really cut a lot of excess out of my life, and people that really didn't that I was, well, I'm childhood friends. No, they're all gone, because it was a great defining moment for me to use to gain more for my future. And the people that I've met since, for example, there was somebody I knew for about 3 years, and then somehow it come up, and she's like, "I've never even heard your story." So I'm like, "All right." So we had a glass of wine, and I'm telling her the story. And I love, and this isn't meant to be sarcastic, but it's silly to me. I can actually almost cue how quickly somebody's mouth drop opens as I'm telling them the story, because I'm like, "Okay, so I survived being married to a con artist," and they're like, every single time. And now it makes me chuckle because I'm like, yeah, you didn't see that one coming. But it's not me telling it from the viewpoint of it triggers me to talk about it anymore. I talk about it from the viewpoint of there's a reason why I went through this. I've gained so much. I can look at the silver lining. And that's my other advice to other people is just try your hardest, no matter how upset you are at the moment, how backwards life feels, is look for the silver lining in this exact moment, because there always is one. Absolutely always. There's still something to be grateful for. For me, it was my strength. For me, it was me realizing how much extra strength I had that I didn't realize I had. So those are two of the pieces of advice that I give everybody. And of course, my third one is happiness is revenge. That make sure you are so deliciously happy in your life. I don't care if it's eating ice cream every night or whatever. I don't care. If you're having a really bad day and that's the only thing that's working for you, go for it. For me, it's going into the kitchen and turning on a movie or music and candles. And I even cook in the dark sometimes. And I know that sounds silly. That I don't know if anybody's ever tried that, but I only keep lower lights on, not the upper lights.
Yeah.
And I will light candles. And when I'm really struggling, really stressed out, I'll turn off most of the lights. And it's almost like more of a textural experience. And that's something I've found that really helps me. And that's one of my self-care routines that I'm promoting RivkaLeah there a little bit, that, RivkaLeah is the best in the world about self-care. So I'm going to say that's my self-care. But that is one thing. So I've just learned that the best one, though, was to give myself way more grace. Just
I love that.
I've asked a lot of other people when they're going through it, have you given yourself grace today? And have you learned to be kind to yourself? Or I've said this many times because I've said it to myself. Stop being so mean to my friend when they're beating themselves up.
Right.
Because that person matters to me. So I try to remind them to look at it from my viewpoint, that I'm not talking mean to you. Why do you think you get to talk mean to yourself? And because I had to remind myself that a lot of times.
I actually just spoke about this. Violence in communication is exactly what it is. You don't realize that you're doing it to yourself. Mm-hmm. So when you become conscious of your unconscious, and I love all of the little things that you've put into place, mm-hmm. and that's what helps move you forward. And it just, you just come out in a much happier place, because it truly is, when you're happy, it is the best. And I don't necessarily like the word revenge, but it's the best that.
Oh, I'll use it. Don't worry.
Because they see it. Or even if, not that you want them in your lives and knowing what you're doing, but they have, on some sort of visceral level, they know that you're doing good. Mm-hmm. So I think that that's beautiful. And you did touch on this a little bit. Can you expand a little bit more on how your experience with this trauma has shaped your perspective on life and influenced your personal growth?
Well, so starting that year, there were a lot of new books that I read. Therapy again helped. But my real big one was changing my circle of friends. That completely changed. Um, the quality time that I spent with my kids changed too. It did have a harder effect on my daughter in a different way, and she's the one I still am trying to figure that out with her because it really, I think it was really difficult for her. Whereas the boys were a bit younger, and the sense of home, especially for my middle son, became a very, very big deal after that event. And so I've been very careful about always having a happy home, that we don't have a stressful home, we don't have a chaotic home, that every morning, and it depends on who gets out of their bedrooms first. We have a habit of whoever gets into the kitchen first picks the music. And so my youngest son will pick sometimes opera or classical. He loves that. I'm very proud of him. And my middle son is crotchety old soul in ways, and I love him just the way he is. But he's always picks like 70s, like Vietnam mash music. And I'm like, oh, it's like 7 o'clock in the morning. But if he's out there first, which hardly ever like happens. So that's the good news. But we do those kind of things together. And I've tried to create a very happy environment for myself, for my family, for my friendships, and for my business. And that it's kind of like, I even redid my home a couple of years ago, that if something doesn't have a place to be put away, it obviously doesn't belong. And that's kind of my attitude about everything in life. If you cannot figure out where it fits, it obviously is not working and it needs to go. And so, like every January, I normally donate probably 10 or 12 bags of stuff to Goodwill. I literally have these systems put in place to keep our home sacred, that it needs to be clean, it needs to be organized, and it doesn't need to be freak out, the house is messy, but we all work together to keep our home happy. And I want to make sure that my kids have a sense of home that most people don't get. And that's been very important to me.
I do the same in my house too. Everything has a place, and
Mhm.
that's where it lives. And if I don't have a place for it, it doesn't live here. It needs to go.
Yes. Yep.
So, well, this is fabulous. I could go on for hours with you, and I really hope that you would be willing to come back again and maybe
Sure.
expand upon this, because there's so many more questions that I have for you and that I think that other people in my community and my collective would love to hear.
Absolutely.
So I will not ask you any more questions today and kind of hold you to a promise of coming back again in the very near future.
Sure. No problem at all. Anytime.
All right. Well, I really appreciate it. So thank you very much. And for everybody that has been listening, I hope you are having a fabulous day and that you all took a little bit of something from Marisa here, and enjoy the happy and go forward and realize that you are beautiful and wonderful as you are, and you can have a happy life. So thank you, everybody. I am just thrilled to have been here. So cheers, everyone.